I think that we need to continue this conversation about stopping time and whether or not I'd be able to manipulate fire at a later date, because it looks like we're live.
It looks like we are going live. We are taking over.
We have taken over. Yes. Baby Pagani is taking Pagani's time right now.
Sure.
And I think Hungerford just went on vacation, so Oz didn't want to be here alone.
Right.
So he decided to give us the Wednesday slot today.
Yeah, basically everybody else took off out of the building.
Yeah.
And left us with the cameras, and so we're here to talk to you about lore.
Whatever we want, basically.
Right.
And
Right.
you had something in mind.
Yeah, just so people know, I'm Doug Seacat. What am I? Senior writer?
I think you're
and
senior
continuity?
writer and continuity.
And you are?
I'm Matt Goetz. I'm the writing manager and role-playing game producer.
That's right. And today I'd like to talk to you about something I've been thinking about for a while, something I've been wanting to talk to the audience about for some time, kind of going back to when we were working on the Man of War.
Okay.
The new Man of War units and forces.
If it's something that's been weighing on your mind for months, then it has to be like super critical to the ongoing
it's big.
wars of the Iron Kingdoms. It's big.
It's definitely big, and it also relates to some of the work we've been doing with the Tharn. We've been thinking about the Tharn, getting into some of the details of how their tribes work, where they live, how they've helped to be one of those forces that kind of makes the wilderness of the Iron Kingdoms as dangerous as it is.
They're an element, sure.
I think they're a major element. They're one of the most terrifying forces that exists in the wilds, and particularly in like the deep woods of the Iron Kingdoms. And to me, this all relates back to one of the unsung heroes of the Iron Kingdoms, a group that really doesn't get much attention, which is the Iron Kingdom Lumberjack. And so, no, wait a minute.
Okay.
So,
no, I'm with you.
Yeah,
we're learning this as you are. So,
yeah, I think this is one of the most terrifying professions in our setting, and they almost never get the limelight. We never talk about what it's like to be a lumberjack in the Iron Kingdoms, to go into the woods, like on a day-to-day basis, to chop down trees. That you got things like druids, you got Tharn, you got Trollkin living there. I mean,
do they get hazard pay then?
I think their families get some pay after they get murdered and have their hearts eaten, but I don't think there's a lot of hazard pay.
So in our world, the world that we currently live in, lumberjack is actually a really dangerous profession. It's in like the top 10 deadliest professions that people can have.
Well, and that's just normal dealing.
That's just normal dealing with like trees falling on
trees falling on you, plus like the hardware that's required to cut down trees.
Sure. Like the people who cut the tops off trees, the arborists who climb up, and, like have their little mini chainsaws. So you're telling me that in the Iron Kingdoms, lumberjack life is even more dangerous because of like cannibalism and what? Like what?
Cannibalism?
Well, Tharn cannibals.
I don't think of the Tharns as cannibals, though. I mean, like...
Well, they're exo-cannibals. They're not endo-cannibals.
But, I mean, they're not really eating their own species anymore.
That's endo-cannibalism.
Okay.
Exo-cannibalism is when you eat other people outside your group.
Oh, okay, sure.
So they are exo-cannibals.
I don't think that distinction exists in our setting.
Oh, okay.
There's enough things that eat other things.
All right, so lay it out for me. After you have, like, your hot cakes and your tea, what is the average lumberjack daily experience?
Well, I don't personally know a whole lot about lumberjacking. Like, I mean, that's probably something that you would know more about, since you actually go out into the wilderness and deal with the wilds, whereas I stay behind my desk and sit in a chair and type on a keyboard. but no, like I think one of the things that's interesting about it is that is a job that has to be done. Like we know in every one of our major kingdoms, there's massive forests inhabited with terrifying creatures that have significant barriers, guardians. We know the Circle Ouroboros has carved off significant pieces of like the thornwood, the gnarls in Signar. In Kador, you have like 5 or 6 major forests that the Circle has carved out. The Old Witch is watching over some of those. There's conflicts between the two. Right. We've got Tharn tribes in all those places. And you also have things like griffins. You've got your
Griffins are kind of out beyond where you'd be going to get your
in general,
your cabinetry wood.
But I do think it's easily possible. Like let's say you're a lumberjack, you're going up, you're going to clear up some of that top tree top, some of the lumber off of one of those top trees. You climb up a tree, like a really tall tree in one of those forests. You've been working hard. All of a sudden, Griffin comes flying by.
Just scoop somebody off
out of the tree. Yeah.
Well, circle of life. So, like, do IK lumberjacks, like, do they carry weapons? Do they wear armor? Are they kitted out like adventurers?
Well, I think, like, some of our best examples of kind of the type, I think, are found in Kador. Like, the place where we featured lumberjacks the most is in Kador. And we know that there's a lot of untapped wilderness resources in Kador. We've shown, like, some of our prominent characters have a background as lumberjacks, like the Butcher of Kardov. In The Butcher of Kardov, the novella by Dan Wells, we had a chance to see, before he kind of lost his mind, the Butcher was doing some lumberjacking out in the northern wilds.
So the people who used to work with the Butcher as lumberjacks, are they like, oh, he was so quiet all the time?
Well,
he was really,
I think
really into using axes, but
there was definitely some incidents, I think, even then, because the other thing is, because in northern Kador you also have a variety of criminal organizations. Like, we know we have the Kayazi control certain industries, and I think we had some run-ins between the Butcher and Bratya that was in that northern region, sort of a backwoods Bratya.
So Gearbox Grinds asked the question, don't IK lumberjacks have laborjacks? Absolutely.
Yeah,
they're called timberjacks.
Well, and that's something that I like. That's an area that this is all stuff that I kind of wish that, like, I would like to see represented more on the tabletop. Like, it's one of these things. Like I would like to see a lumberjack theme force.
A lumberjack theme force.
Yeah,
So you got your man of war bombardiers because they have chainsaws.
Yeah, anything with chainsaws, with axes. Like, because maybe it goes across kingdoms. Like, maybe there's some kind of fellowship that could happen. Where a lumberjack alliance.
A lumberjack alliance. So it's like the Steam and Iron Workers Union, but it's just like people who die amongst the trees.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good like meeting topic. But yeah, like, we haven't shown a lot of true timberjacks. Like, we've talked about them in the role-playing game.
Yep.
Like, I think one of our main laborjacks that we showed in Kador was oriented toward lumber, right? Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah.
It was called a timberjack?
No, we've referred to them as timberjacks in some of the fiction.
I can't remember the name of the chassis off the top of my head, but we've definitely shown that there are specialized jacks that work to cut down the trees, and they have awesome weaponry that's also be useful to defend your lumberjacks. But then you're usually probably just dealing with some jack marshals. I do think that, like, it's one of those professions that you would have to approach differently in the Iron Kingdoms than you do in the real world. Like you do inherently have some weapons in your hands at the very least.
Well,
so that's good.
You got an axe.
Yeah,
right?
You got an axe.
And
you know how to use it.
You could probably strangle somebody with a PV or something.
Sure.
You know how to tie a quick timber hitch around someone's throat.
But I do think those, like you could imagine an expedition into the forest, with one of these big companies. Like, they don't want to lose any guys.
Sure.
Or maybe the rookies. Like, the rookies could.
They want to lose the rookies.
No, I mean, you got to let the rookies have their moment to prove themselves, out there in the trees. But you don't want to actually lose anybody. You want to train people up. You want to get them back alive. So you send them out with, like, some veterans who have some gear. You might have, I could totally imagine some kind of a maybe like hand-me-down man-of-war force with weapons like the bombardiers, like maybe some old, broken down, refurbished bombardiers. Maybe they don't launch grenades anymore, but they still have the the ripsaw.
The coal-powered saw.
Sure.
So you take the rookies out and you say, "Don't forget to look to the skies," and they're like, "Oh, because you expect rain." No, griffins will come and just snatch you right out of the tree.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's actually interesting too, because with the new Man of War CID that happened a little while ago, they gave the bombardiers this ability to. I think it's on the command attachment, but when they advance through rough terrain, they aren't slowed by it. The idea being that they're using those saws and just like ripping through the underbrush and chopping down.
Yeah, clearing all of the, and that's the other thing. Like, so you've got all kinds of hostile wildlife, that some of which is maybe even smaller than, you've got like thornwood maulers and things like that. You've got the big stuff, but then you could also have smaller threats. And, I think like we have like buzzard beetles and things, there's a lot of,
Who's the guy that named those? He's like, it's a beetle that eats bodies.
It eats
buzzard beetle.
Yeah,
screw it.
That's how stuff gets named. but no, I do think that like the Lumberjacks would be a big part of it. We haven't really had a chance to show, I think, any Signarin forestry jacks, but I imagine they have to have them.
Whatever. Yeah.
But like you would also like, I imagine it being just a part of the company method of working, that you have to know how far in you can go. Like, because the way we've kind of set it up is that the circle and the thorn, usually they're kind of in the deeper areas, and sometimes they'll set out warnings, you know, like you might have totems or marked stones or, you know, certain...
Let's be fair, though. Like, Thorn hangs skulls and rib cages as a warning.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, it's a little bit more ominous than somebody wrote on a rock.
Right. Well, so, okay, so you send your next force out into the woods, and then they come upon, you know, like Lenny. Who's the rookie from last week.
That's the most IK name ever.
Well, you know, he's a Midlander. And so he's hanging from the tree, his heart's been torn out, his rib cage is split open, and that is a marker of, you know what, that's probably Thorn territory. We probably shouldn't go past that.
So this actually points to something that I find kind of fascinating about the Iron Kingdoms, because it is such a developed world, right?
Sure.
Like there's a lot of civilization, but we've worked really hard to preserve the idea of the unapproachable wilderness.
Sure.
Where there are these wild and dangerous places that are just outside the walls of the cities, just beyond the roads that people travel. And for a lot of people in the setting, that's the only way that they can get from like Corvus over to, I don't know, Rimmoxdale or something, right? Like, they have to go through these incredibly dangerous lands. So you've got mercenaries that are protecting.
Yeah, and I do think it varies. I mean, like, I think, you know, most of the civilized routes, you're probably usually safe. Usually. but the deep wilderness is a different thing, and we have certain areas that are just basically trackless, where like nobody's even made maps of parts of the worm wall.
Want to travel safely? Go by train.
Yeah, going by train.
Don't go by train.
We've had multiple trains attacked also, but I do think train is usually safer than just by wagon, or just like you don't take a shortcut. Like, I mean, it makes me think of you know, recently like some discussions. I read some discussions about like the Donner Party, you know, and why that happened, why that was so bad, and a lot of that had to do with them being told, take this particular shortcut, you know, at a bad time of the year. And that's the kind of stuff I can imagine happening in the Iron Kingdoms too. Is like, you know, you listen to the wrong, you know, Manhunter, or you know, you listen to Yuri the Axe when he's, you know, in a bad mood. You know, when you're trying to travel between, you know, a couple of northern Khadoran villages, you're going to wind up in a bad place.
I don't know why anybody would like go to Yuri the Axe
for travel
travel advice.
Well, yeah, but like, let's say you just run into him, you know, on the road. Like, he's a nice looking guy. He's got his coat. He's got his axe. You want to know how to get. He looks like he knows what he's doing. He's got, you know, maybe some traps.
He's wearing half a bear.
He's a woodsman.
He's wearing half a bear. He's like that guy in the remake of True Grit. He's just riding around wearing half a bear.
But I do think that's like an archetype.
You don't go to them for advice.
No, but I think that's an archetype in Khador. Like, we've talked about the Manhunter and
the bear pelt wearer is an archetype in Khador?
No, it really, like, the notion of these guys that join the Khadoran Irregulars, you know, the Kassite woodsmen, the Manhunters, like, this is a proud culture in northern Khador of these rustic communities that rely on these wilderness trappers. You know, maybe not Yuri the Axe specifically, who's a wanted criminal.
People go to Ron Cruzy for advice all the time.
That is true. Like, we know intellectually that Ron Cruzy, if he wanted to, could hunt and kill us, and survive for quite a long time, and make like clothes of our flesh. But he doesn't. That's not what he does.
That's a courtesy to us every day.
As a courtesy to us, he mostly paints and works on miniatures.
That's true.
But he is capable of murdering us.
I agree.
So Yuri, I think, is the same way. Like, he's capable of murdering you. That doesn't mean he's always going to murder you.
That's fair. So before we completely get off the subject of lumberjacking, which I can't believe is the thing that you wanted to come in today.
No, but I want you to think about it. I want you to put yourself in the shoes of a guy who decides that this is your profession.
Right.
Like, and I'm going to make this my life's career. It has to be a career that does not have a lot of longevity.
Yeah, I imagine people go to it out of desperation and failure at every other topic in their lives.
But I mean, that would suggest that they're all incompetent. And I don't think that's necessarily true. I think these guys are badasses. Like, I think these guys are truly, like, courageous.
So are you pitching like a Merc unit of lumberjacks
Yeah,
right now?
yeah. Well, I think we need more lumberjacks.
Oh,
literally.
Oh, wow.
I think we need more woodsmen represented in the game. Like, I like the fact that we've kind of approached that as a Kadoran theme. But as I said, those wilderness regions exist in every kingdom. Like, Ord is a kingdom that has made its fame.
Soggy.
But Ord is a kingdom that's made its fame on its ships, on its navy, most of which are made with a sizable quantity of wood.
Right.
That wood has to come from somewhere.
Yeah, and many men die.
Many men die to secure the wood for Ordic ships.
So I have a little bit of story from my own life about the challenges and trials of trying to fell a tree. When you're cutting down a sizable tree, and even with a modern chainsaw, not a coal-powered chainsaw, which is just ludicrous.
They have really good steam engines.
Apparently. But when you're doing it, you have to be very careful to cut something called a back wedge. You cut in the opposite side.
So it'll fall the right way?
Well, so it'll fall the right way, but also to take pressure off where you're cutting.
Sure.
Because if you don't have something that kind of causes the cut to open up slightly, it'll create a lot of friction on your blade, and it'll eventually bind it.
Sure.
I learned this the hard way, that the back wedge, just having one isn't enough. It has to be the right size of one. Because I was trying to fell a tree with my friend Brian, and...
Is this on your land?
On our property, yeah.
Okay.
We managed to get like a third through, and we had done the back wedge. We thought we were doing it right.
Sure.
We had not. So a chainsaw got stuck halfway through the tree, and we spent the next like 6 to 8 hours with hatchets and axes and handsaws, just trying to get through this tree to be able to get the chainsaw out. So
yeah,
it requires a lot of technical skill, a lot of persistence, and an incredible amount of sweat, even with modern tools that we have.
Right, and so imagine like you're in a similar kind of situation. You're Kadoran lumber party.
Right.
You're out cutting down a tree. Your timberjack gets its saw stuck in one of those trees, and then like 15 Tharn, come out of the woods toward you. Or like I was even thinking about one of your pieces of fiction, which treated lumberjacks badly, which was Tanith the Feral Song. Like we showed her one of the things that we've shown the most often as a way for the Circle Ouroboros to retaliate against civilization. They tend to pick their targets carefully. Like they don't want to provoke a massive retaliation, so they aren't usually like going after the capitals, or going into like major, industrial centers. But what they're doing is hitting like lumber companies. Yeah. And we showed with Tanith the Feral Song, we showed her striking against some Kadoran forestry people.
Well, they're cutting down trees. They're being dicks.
Right. And she brought, the woods to life. She had the fallen trees like feast on these people. So I'm just imagining, like you get your chainsaw stuck in a tree, Tharn and druids come out of the trees toward you.
I'm just picturing that afternoon, but people are throwing javelins at me the whole time.
Sure, right? They're throwing javelins.
It would have slowed the process down.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I just think, it's interesting to me, like, I do think you're right. There could be some people that get pushed into that through other lines of work.
Do you get shanghaied into this job?
That's a good question. I like that.
Come to Kator, where tree fells you.
Oh, John, no.
I like the idea of getting shanghaied, of getting forced into the service.
Yeah.
Like maybe just going into town, getting drunk, grabbing some people.
So Grommelfist asks, can druids animate felled trees like angry Trents? Sort of. They're called wolds. Yeah. Like a significant portion of the body of any wold is made out of blood-soaked lumber and rope.
Yeah, and I have to imagine they're not usually cutting down those trees.
Oh my God, Doug. Who's the druid whose job it is just to make rope?
Like, is there... Actually, that could be a pretty cool theme. Like, he could have some badass, like, animated ropes.
My name is hooks. Torvish the Rope Maker, right? Well, we got Vasquez the Knot Keeper. Maybe he got started just making rope. You're just like, wow, gotta get this 3-strand done. Like, that is another underappreciated. The rope makers and sail makers of the Iron Kingdoms need some more respect, Doug.
Yeah,
you should start writing about them.
Sure. Well, I think all those professions that you kind of don't think about, like there's a lot of added peril to what would be considered like an ordinary job,
right,
in the setting. But yeah, I think that there's definitely room for some kind of a theme force. We just need to get Jason on board.
Good luck. Is there any job in the Iron Kingdoms that isn't perilous? Like, are milliners okay?
I think like shoemakers, not really a big problem. Like if you're in a
I feel like Grimkin just want to screw with shoemakers.
Well, yeah.
There's some sort of like cobbler Grimkin that's out there just leaving rusty nails for them to step on.
What we need to do is make like a dark version of a brownie that is like where it's a darker pact.
I know when you say brownie, you're talking about one of the Fae, but I am just picturing a dessert.
I mean like a Fae creature that in the middle of the night takes care of things for you, like makes your life seem easier. Mm-hmm. But it's all part of a dark pact. It's all because you've entered into an agreement with like an unholy entity who will be taking a toll for what you have asked of them. So they may make you 5 pairs of shoes, but then later, maybe they want a piece of your soul.
Souls for souls.
Souls for souls. I can't believe the direction this conversation is taking.
You were the one to ask. I do think there are safe professions. Like we do amp up the danger a lot. Like, you know, if there's to some degree, if you looked at the setting through our fiction and you know the things that we focus on, you would expect that like the moment you walk out of a city, you're going to get a javelin to the head, or like a gatorman's going to eat your face.
To be fair, I feel that way about like leaving the building around here.
Well, sure.
Like Ron might be in the parking lot with a javelin, just waiting for the slow one of the herd.
Well, sure, but I do think like by and large, most people are able to get through their day without being attacked or have their heart ripped out or anything like
that. Somebody in Twitch chat, Saber Deck, mentioned that chocolatiers probably have it safe.
Sure.
That is wrong.
No?
That is absolutely wrong. When I was doing the fiction for the Longest Night organized play thing for last year, the entire basis of the fiction was a kind of a horror anthology. And the framing device was this candy shop that a little kid went into.
Candy can be scary.
Candy is terrifying. Candy is just absolutely terrifying. But the chocolatier at this candy shop had a trapperkin that was basically forcing the chocolatier to bring him children. Otherwise, he was going to take the guy's kids. So,
right. Sort of
not even chocolatiers got it safe.
Sort of a Hansel and Gretel kind of situation.
There is no happy life.
But you know, like you're making the counter argument. I still think big city, like normal job, you're probably okay.
Except for all the serial killers and gangs and
the chances
assassins.
of any individual cobbler being hunted down by a serial killer, I think, is small. So
you would think that. You would think that until they come for you.
You're just a little paranoid. Like I think if you were in the setting, you would be very stressed out all the time.
I'm already stressed out just talking about it.
Like, do you see yourself as potentially being like a good lumberjack in the Iron Kingdoms?
No, I'm dead day one.
Would you maybe manage? Maybe you could manage the company.
Maybe
send some people out
from far away. Sure. But then I'd have their deaths hanging over me, and I would just start drinking constantly, just like, oh God, another one. I sent 20 men to die.
And then casket.
And then casket. Yeah, exactly. I got no easy way out, Doug.
One of the things I like about that profession in terms of peril plus like, you know, its application, its military application is the violent specific nature of the tools that are required. You know, like we were talking about before, like you got your jacks, you got your chain weapons, you've got your axes, you know, even just for like moving the wood to the river or something, probably have a variety of like hooked mechanisms.
They're called PVs. They're awesome.
What is a PV?
A PV is like a pole arm that has a barb on one side and an articulating claw on the
Would you say
barb.
it's like a vulge?
It's nothing like a
Is it
vulge.
like a glaive guisarme?
It is not like a glaive guisarme. It is not like a bec de corban. It's a PV.
Is it like a fauchard?
It's not like a fauchard. It's like no other. Stop it with the polearm names.
All right.
No, it's just like a hook that you snag down into the lumber, and then the arm kind of provides pressure so you can move a whole log around more easily.
But you could kill things with that.
You could probably kill. Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Goetz, truth or lie? The game is called Goetz, fact or lie.
Sure.
And you can look it up. Peevee, I think it's called.
You know, we could probably take some questions if people have them.
Yeah, I think that we have driven this topic into the ground, so to speak.
I will say, you know, given a little time to prepare, maybe we would come up with something other than lumberjacks. But I do think, I still stand by the fact that they're a fascinating aspect of the setting that should be explored in greater detail in the fiction as well as in the miniature game.
Well, that's one of the neat things about the IK in my mind is the extrapolation angle, where
people are asking about Ios's wood. We can get into that a little bit too. But continue with what you were going to say.
Well, because like we know that there are these kind of mundane things going on in the setting just to keep industry going, but because of mechanica, because of laborjacks and warjacks and all of the kind of supernatural threats of the setting,
right?
Like even the most mundane thing, if looked at from the right angle, becomes this really interesting, very violent, very dangerous profession.
Yeah. Well, and it's one of the things I think is fun when you're running a role-playing game, but it can also apply to War Machine and Hordes when you're creating scenarios. It's fun to take something like that and put the players into something that they think they understand, they think they're familiar with it. Maybe even like one of my favorite things to do in a role-playing game is to stage things where it seems kind of dull or boring, and then start upping the stakes. You know, you have that chainsaw stop right when the Tharn attack, or like to me it's a great staging for tension, because like you can also set it up where like the best way to do that kind of game in my opinion is like you really make the players wonder if there's something wrong with you, because you start like you get really into the detail with like the various members of the crew that they're interacting with. Like you make them wonder like is the GM really running like a simulation of like a lumber camp? Like, is that really what we're doing? Like, is that what we're doing for several weeks? And like you getting to know all the people there, and then all of a sudden they get attacked. You know who those guys are. Sure. You know who their family is. Now you care. Yeah.
Well, actually, I never got around to doing it, but I used to be really into the show Hell on Wheels, which is about the building
I still need to watch that.
The Transcontinental Railroad. Yeah. And it got me thinking about building roads and railroads in the Iron Kingdoms and how that's super dangerous.
It's super dangerous, and that relates too, because you know a lot of the railways will go through those wilderness regions, and they have to clear the path.
So I was thinking about writing an adventure where you're basically Iron Hands, the mercenaries that protect the schemos,
right?
Traveling through like one dangerous region to the next, having to deal with survival, having to deal with constant attacks,
right?
And you know. It's
weird
something
weather.
Yeah, exactly. If I ever get the opportunity to do, I would enjoy putting out some kind of adventure that is using that kind of mundane starting point, extrapolated out for the Iron Kingdoms.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite things to do. Like, you know, some of my favorite of the old, the IKEs, the little shorts that we were doing. A lot of times we would take something that's just let's look at things from an ordinary person's perspective rather than like a warcaster who can kill people with his mind. You know what I mean? You know, there's a certain degree of when you can just like think and kill somebody that I think it changes your perspective. I think it makes it harder to have empathy, as we've talked about before. Like a lot of our warcasters, even the sympathetic ones, are kind of psychotic.
Well, yeah, they're mass murderers.
Right.
Like from the opposing perspective, basically every warlock or warcaster, they've got the blood of hundreds on their hands.
Yeah, absolutely. And you kind of have to be able to distance yourself to do your job. Whereas if you're a lumberjack, like your job is simple. Like I just gotta cut down this tree. Just gotta get this wood back. But the question came up: does Ios need much wood? It's an interesting one. We don't show a lot of Iosan wood construction, but I do think there are wooden buildings in the major cities. I do think there is some degree of carpentry happening in Ios. I think they have actually. It'd be interesting to look at the Iosan forest in a little bit more detail, because it feels like
it's not on fire.
Well, it's not actually on fire as much as our artwork suggests, as I've gotten into with Schick before. But like the thing that's interesting to me about the Iosan forest is how deliberate it has probably been engineered. You know, like it was deliberately created to be an obstacle for entry into Ios. And we've kind of talked before about the fact that, like, you know, you tend to think of elves in traditional fantasy settings a certain way of kind of allowing everything to run wild, to kind of have these untamed spaces, but that's not how I imagine things in Ios. Like, and it's not how I imagine things even with the goddess Syra as being a goddess of spring. Like, we've talked about the fact that, like, in the fane of Syra, like, it's more like a garden. It's there's a degree of control and regulation among the Iosans. Like, they don't necessarily like just letting things run rampant.
Right.
And I think that their forests would be the same way. Like, I think there's all these little, it's more of a maze than like a wild forest. Now, there's probably areas that have gone fallow since they haven't, you know, they've been in decline. They aren't living in as many areas as they used to be. But I still think that there's a lot of sort of deliberate intent in that forest and in the paths. Like, I imagine those paths being really inconvenient and confusing. Like, if you're just like an Iosan merchant who's trying to travel from like one place to another. Again, you know, there's normal people in Ios too, and you got to take these stupid like routes that, you know, turn 3 lefts, then a right, then.
Their I-5 is literally called the Knot.
Yeah, exactly.
So there was another Iosan question from Woozlewazzle that I really like because Woozlewazzle. It's a great name.
That is a good name.
Because it speaks to something that you and I have talked about a number of times. House Elaware looks significantly different from Vyre and Shail forces. Is this large range of aesthetics from house to house the norm, or is Elaware an outlier? I think it's the norm.
I think it's the norm too. Like, there's certain things I wish we had even made a little bit more different.
Yeah,
from
like
one another.
Scarith Isian. I would love if he had a more different look to himself.
Right. You know, although, you know, I think he's less affiliated with his house.
Yeah.
You know, now. But yeah, I especially among the great military houses. But like, I kind of wish that we had made some of the Veer forces, for example, like a little bit more different. I mean, I still
although the
like,
Electromancers
do look different. Yeah.
I was just writing something for the upcoming Criterion League that is sort of a celebration of the history of War Machine. It's the 15th anniversary for War Machine, and that's what the league's all about.
Right.
And in there, I had the opportunity to write from the POV of a member of House Rissler.
I think you said it about
Reisler. But they're
House Reisler.
They're phenomenal riflemen and archers. They protect the Twilight Gate.
Yeah, they're sort of like, I always think of them as like the elite mainline infantry. Like, if you think of like in the real world, if you think of like Imperial, you know, once we had riflemen as a regular thing, like, you know, the House Reisler would be like the elite variant of the Iosan line infantry.
Yeah, and in the Old World Guide, it talks about them wearing like dark colored hooded cloaks with like armored backing and everything. And I would really like to preserve that look if we ever see like a special Reisler unit come into the Retribution of Syra.
Yeah, and I do think, you know, with all these kind of concepts, we constantly run into an issue that the artists have to deal with more than we do. We usually try to keep things loose so that the artists can do what they want, but there's always a little bit of a struggle between distinct internal aesthetic and the faction look, you know, and so you kind of want soldiers that all look good when you're fielding them together. But personally, I really do like the notion of especially the great military houses having their own distinct, you know, identity, their own iconography, you know, maybe even their own color schemes. And so I was glad to see that we were able to do that. Like, that was a very deliberate process, you know, when we were adding those units to make them distinct, to make the swordsman unique.
Yeah. Well, it's the Legion of Everblight problem that we've talked about before.
Sure.
Where it's possible and likely that Everblight could blight things that aren't Nis or Ogren.
Yeah, like,
but you want that sort of visual continuity in the army on the table.
Right, or we wouldn't want to just have like an added, like, you know, you've got like a blighted Nis unit and there's just like a human dude in there. He's like the 10th guy.
So Pendinor asks, wants to understand if Crix has commoners.
Do they have lumberjacks?
Well, all their trees, like there's the blighted woods that they use for black ships and stuff, so they'd have to. But Pendinor wants to know if Crix has commoners in their nation, or if it's just pirates, warriors, and undead. They do.
Absolutely. And
yeah, they're just all jerks.
Well, no. I think there is we've talked about it before, like they'd basically be the serfs. Like, Crix has a lot of people that are living the worst lives imaginable.
They basically live in Bartertown.
Yeah, there's and like I've always thought it'd be interesting to show the perspective of like we've talked about before the Crixian farms. Yeah. Like there's Crixian low end. There's Crixian peasants out there who are living in probably like squalid huts, who are trying to tend to the worst land possible, where nothing can barely grow. Like they're happy to get a single potato, but meanwhile they've got some kind of undead like breathing down their neck, ready, just like eager for them to die, so they can make use of them. But they need like. We know that they make use of people. Like it's almost like this culling process of some people have enough ambition and drive to force their way into the city where you're likely to get murdered on any street corner. Like there's just so many horrible things about Crixian life. But I do think there is a lower class in Crix that it has to be the most oppressed, miserable people in the Iron Kingdoms. I mean, really, like nobody wants to live on a Crixian farm.
Well, somebody was just asking why don't those Crixian peasants just leave? And my
answer,
an
island.
Sharks.
Sharks.
Yeah, like they're not going to be building big sailing ships. They're going to have like catamarans and canoes and stuff. And sharks are just huge.
Well, and I do think there could be there's some degree to which that could happen, but usually like the thing is most people, you get used to your life, and like people are amazingly adaptable, and you don't realize how bad your life is until you have a point of comparison. You know what I mean? So like most people, you're living on a Crixian farm, you're just thinking about like, those guys in town seem to have it pretty good. Yeah. You're not thinking like, I need to move to Signar.
What you're telling me is that suffering is relative, not absolute.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And I think the blight could mess with you a little bit too, where like maybe there's certain, a certain drive, a certain ambition that happens where, you get a little bit of blight. You're like, what? I could kill my neighbor, take his land.
Yeah.
Make him farm, or make his children farm for me. So there's a lot of cruelty that spreads in this miserable, squalid existence.
It's sort of like a rising tide of blood lifts all boats.
I don't know if I'd say that, but we have talked about
it's trickle-down economics, but what's trickling is blood.
It's horrible, but we have talked about how like the piracy is one of those, that is a glorious profession. Like people look up to the pirates. Like the pirate life is the ideal.
Sure.
Across
it's aspirational.
And then, but it's like anything else in life. Like once you get what you've been dreaming of, you realize even that's not that great. Like you get onto that pirate ship, and like you talked about before, you get one of those like termite or lice infested Cadoran coats or whatever that you were talking
and you're happy to have it.
You're happy to have it. Like the life on the boat that you thought was just eminent freedom and luxury. Then you've got a lich lord telling you what to do. So there's always misery to go around in Crix.
There's plenty of misery. Anybody else have any questions for us? Because I think we got time to field just some random lore questions.
Well, there's somebody asking about how big sharks are in the Iron Kingdoms.
I think that they range in size from pretty big to ridiculously big.
Yeah, I think it'd be like anything else. We've talked about blight. Both Torax blight, but also we know Blightergast spends a lot of time in the water because he's got he's got a lot of.
So for those of us who haven't heard this before, in the old D20 rules for the Iron Kingdoms role-playing game, Blightergast had rules, and one of his skills was oceanography at like
plus 80 or something.
Plus 80, something ridiculous.
Well, it was important when we were figuring out the dragons. We wanted them to be distinct and have certain personalities, so they had certain hobbies. And so Blightergast knows a lot about the ocean. He's interested in ocean wildlife.
So he spends a lot of time swimming.
He's swimming. He's off checking out the reefs. He's looking at whales. He's checking out pools of fish. And I think that even if he's a scientist who's interested, it could be he's Drac Cousteau. Yeah.
Drac Cousteau.
but even if he's interested in these things, he's probably not too concerned about how he is affecting the environment. It's just like anytime you send a scientist into the woods, they're affecting the world around them. Blightergast is literally blighting the aquatic life around him.
Right.
And so I do think there's blighted whales. There's probably blighted squid. There's probably, and some of those could be larger than normal. There could be ancient leviathans, in Meridius that had been rarely encountered. So I think there's all kinds of possibility for horrific things in the water there.
So our Our technical crew back there are laughing at something. I'm hoping that they'll share with us in a moment.
Well, people are asking about octosharks and let's see here. What do we got?
If there was a Tharn chieftain in charge of all of the Tharn, when would he start the Tharn CID? As soon as possible. But as we mentioned earlier, the reason this isn't a dev chat is because so many of our devs are currently unavailable. John?
So the simple answer is when he would want to.
Well, the truth is the Tharn aren't very organized.
Or she.
And so like the Tharn they might be busy like with other things, and then they're like eventually they will begin the Tharn CID. And sometimes a Tharn chieftain, if you ask him for something, he will not give it to you deliberately.
Sure.
Because he's mean.
They're spiteful?
yeah. Sometimes Tharn chieftains are spiteful.
Dorian Clampett wants to know how Silvestro kept Prospero's head from rotting. Alchemy.
Yeah, I really do want you specifically to write that story. Like I really want the story of when that all went down, and him like making some kind of crazy improvised in the field.
He had to MacGyver
brain preservation solution. You know, I just think that I mean it would be both horrific but also a gritty, you know, engaging story of I'm trying to save my brother. I'm trying to save my brother's brain. And
like how much of it was alchemy and how much of it was like co-opting like Cirrus technology and stuff like that. Or
just desperate. I don't know. Like,
so Roxy just suggested it's a barrel of very strong booze. There
could be some booze
pickled
in there.
him like Admiral Nelson.
Well, like if you play certain games, you know, like The Witcher, most of the alchemy in The Witcher involved some kind of an alchemical or some kind of an alcoholic base.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I do think alcohol is a very important part of alchemy. So you need to have booze in. I think it would make sense to have some kind of maybe.
Yeah. So okay, this is from history, but it's something that we need to make happen in the Iron Kingdoms in some way.
Sure.
When Admiral Nelson died, they shoved his body in a barrel of rum so they could bring it back to England in order to preserve this great hero of the Navy.
Yeah, they put him in a barrel of rum.
They put him in a barrel of rum. When the ship got back to England, the barrel was empty.
What? I don't remember.
People kept going down and stealing little cupfuls of Admiral Nelson's rum.
And drinking it?
And drinking it.
That's because there's a little bit of Admiral Nelson in all of us.
So we need to have something like that for the Iron Kingdoms. There needs to be like the precursor of Navark Govan Trent or something.
Like a holy barrel of rum or something.
Yes.
Like
which ascendant is related to mariners?
Well, we actually have. That's I think Sullivan, but or no, that's not right. I'm blanking on it right now. But we do have a ascendant of farming who is also an ascendant of wine, which is Gordon.
Gordon, yeah.
And
so maybe Gordon's body was
preserved
in a barrel and taken back to Caspia.
A giant cask of wine that is continually reused, but his remains are still in there.
Because the ascendants are like beautified, right? Like their bodies don't rot or putrefy.
We know they eventually turn to bones, like because we know there's so. There's something there.
Is it like a quantum switch? Suddenly, like, body goes away, bones.
I don't know exactly.
Maybe they just have his skeleton in this wine cask, like this Madeira wine cask that they keep refilling.
Sure.
And the people in the Sanctium who are followers of Ascendant Gordon, they just go there and they kind of shake it up a little bit. And they take a draft off, and it's part of like the holy ceremony of Gordon.
I like this.
I am suggesting that is now canon.
That sounds good.
All right.
I'm with it. Well, we've probably rambled enough, I suppose, for the day, unless there's any other questions that we want to answer.
Yeah.
Oh, Pobos Sergio is asking about the Rocketman career for the RPG.
So the Rocketman career has been written, has been play tested, and was sent to editing, and we're waiting for it to get back from editing and an opportunity to slot it into our insider queue. So.
And did you have some other?
Yeah, there's some other Crucible Guard stuff in that at the moment. Actually, Yak, that's a great question. Can you give us Infernals 101?
Yeah, I actually was considering doing that today. I do think we're gonna.
You went with Lumberjacks instead of demons.
Lumberjacks were more timely.
They were more timely.
Infernals are a little bit further out, but I do want to spend a good chunk of time on Infernals. We were going to do that during the live cast at Lock and Load, but then like Schick was talking about, I don't know, attacking people with shoes or something.
He was definitely talking about attacking people.
He derailed me with some nonsense, but the Infernals is such a big and interesting topic that I do think that's something I'd want to spend like a full hour talking about. So if we get a chance to hijack this, or if they ever decide to actually give us our own cast, the problem is we're very unreliable, so it's hard to schedule us week to week. but I do think that I'd like to really do an Infernal.
I would love to do a full hour on Infernals, because
we could do a series on it, but doing a 101, getting back to basics, kind of just talking about the background of Infernals in our setting, I think it'd be great.
A Hellfireside chat.
Hellfireside chat.
Hellfireside chat.
So somebody just brought up, what are the other Infernal orders? We know about the Nanochrian order, but we haven't really talked about any of the others.
We haven't named the others, although it's pretty heavily implied that the Orgoth were likely in cahoots with some other Infernal order that might have been in their minds, that was the gods that they were worshiping.
Right. Absolutely.
So it's one of these things where like the likely source of the Orgoth dark magic is probably a different competing infernal organization that the Nanochrian order probably was fighting against.
Actually, I just got to write a short piece from Orgoth POV for the Criterion League. Check it out when it's available.
Yeah,
I had a lot of fun with that because I wanted to get from their perspective. They are communing with gods. They don't see them as like devilish outsiders or anything. They're just like the spirits of power that they adhere to.
I mean, they're dark.
Well, sure.
I have a question to bring us back around and close this out.
Okay,
right?
Sure.
All right. So I noticed a lot of people mention plaid as far as lumberjacks.
Sure.
So when they encounter Trollkin in the woods, do Trollkin just see them as another clan? Like, oh, they're wearing their target.
Well, like, Trollkin aren't toddlers.
No, but they see these big burly people, because I don't think that there's probably too many surviving Iron Kingdom's lumberjacks that are wee.
Well, I will say this. I don't think it's necessarily the case in Khador in particular that they wear plaid, but in Ord, there's an interesting crossover with some of the Thurian people
wearing the tartan.
There is a bit of a cultural crossover between Trollkin and some of the Ordic Thurians, including an interest in some of the same sports.
Sure.
Some of the like throwing big heavy things as far as you can, or some of those sports, which in the real world are based on some of those same industries, exist among both like the Thurian people and the Trollkin, and I do think there's probably an affinity there, and they could get along. They all like to drink. Yeah. There's definitely, I think there could be some Trollkin lumberjack crossover for our Trollkin theme force. We could maybe mix some Trollkin and Khadorans. We could get that going on.
There's actually a question about the Spectronomicon from No Quarter 6 that I want to address from Popo Sergio again. And is there an easy way to use the Spectronomicon monsters in a common Iron Kingdom RPG
I think it's
encounter?
a good idea.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the major differences from the Spectronomicon are the dread powers that different monsters have.
So it'd just be a matter of bringing in the dread system, or?
Well, I wouldn't do that because dread is sort of tied into how Strange Light Workshop RPG works. If you want to use them in Full Metal Fantasy or in Unleashed, I would recommend either adding feat points to some of the creatures that are at the higher end of the encounter point level and allowing them to use those dread powers for the cost of a feat point.
Right.
Or just getting rid of them for the more middling, lower encounter point creatures like your cask imps or whatnot.
Or you could, I think some of those have a pretty strongly narrative bent, right? Like you could basically decide to use those at a GM's discretion where, as the encounter reaches a climax, you could throw in some of those dread powers.
Yeah, and you might find that you need to bring the encounter points down by like 10 or 15% for Full Metal Fantasy, because those characters tend to be a lot more powerful. So
and combat driven.
And combat driven. So you'll want more of those, will we be getting a collected Strangelight book? I would love to. I can't make that determination, but I would love to even just release it as a PDF collection or something.
Well, and you sort of designed it with the notion that that was a possibility.
Yeah,
eventually they could be combined together.
Yep.
I think a number of those articles combined together nicely. It's just a matter of making that happen.
Yeah. Do you want to take one last question before we go, Doug?
Sure. What do we got? Let's see.
Somebody's shouting about Rulick curling, Drunken Scotsman challenges. No Quarter presents. Hey, No Quarter presents. Yeah, we already have that kind of umbrella.
What do you see a question?
I don't know. Lyle, John, did you guys see a question that seemed pretty interesting?
I don't. What is that about?
Oh, Travis. Hey, Travis. Will we find out more about Gulburn, Ambargoven, and Horarak? Those are some of the additional dragons that were discussed in Wrath of the Dragonfather.
I forgot some of. Are you sure?
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't remember Jorlburn.
Gulburn.
I don't remember that one.
Well, that's your fault. those are dragons from Wrath of the Dragonfather. When are we going to find out more about them?
Probably not soon.
Probably not right away. Yeah. All right, we're getting the wrap it up. So before we go, we want to remind you that you're rapidly running out of time to pick up the mini crate Eris, Angel of Retribution, and Mrs. Walls, I believe, is the VIP on that one.
BFF Tristan just brought up something I also considered as a possible
Scorn
topic
marriage.
at some point. Do Scorn have a marriage system? We might at some point tackle the notion of family structures and being a kid as a Scorn.
All right, so we have September's mini, Eris, Angel of Vengeance,
Yep.
and Mrs. Walls if you subscribe by August 19th. And we're still very excited about, what's that? Legend of the Five Rings with the Togarashi, I believe his name is, the champion of the Dragon Clan. And we should have a special sculpt to people who subscribe at the VIP level for that as well, correct, John?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. And more on that is coming.
More on that is coming.
Yeah,
Yep.
There's concept art out for it that Fantasy Flight put up. But
Oh, okay. So we're not talking about that yet, but don't forget. There we go. Tokune Togashi. All right. So thank you guys.
Yeah. Thanks for letting us steal the
dev chat.
dev chat again. Sorry for no dev talk, but hey.
Yeah. Hopefully there'll be a dev talk next week. Don't forget to check in tomorrow at 10 a.m. for Get Your Paint On with Dallas Kemp. We're out. Lumberjacks, Doug.
Dude, lumberjacks are
Lumberjacks. Cool. I mean, I am amazed by the fact that
you like axes. You like.